I forgave her. I want you to understand that before anything else, because everyone who has heard this story assumes I was a fool, or weak, or blind to what was really happening. I was none of those things. I made a choice, with my eyes open, to rebuild a marriage that had been broken by betrayal. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that my wife had already made a choice of her own, one that would not reveal itself for another 11 months. This is the story of Rachel and Tom Whitfield, and what happens when forgiveness is offered freely, but never actually returned. Before we get into what came next, you need to understand how we got here, because the affair itself was never the most shocking part of this story. What came after it was. There is a version of this story where a man finds out his wife has been unfaithful, he leaves, and life moves on in a straight line from there. That is not what happened here. What happened here took nearly 2 years to fully unfold, and by the end of it, almost nobody involved, not Tom, not Rachel, not even the people who thought they understood every detail, could agree on where the real betrayal had actually taken place. Was it the affair itself? Was it the year that followed? Or was it something that had been happening quietly, long before any of it started? Something neither of them wanted to admit to themselves. Here is what you need to know going in. Two people who had built a life together over 16 years, a home, 2 children, a business they ran side by side, faced a betrayal that should have ended everything. Instead of walking away, Tom chose to stay, to forgive, to rebuild. What he did not know was that his wife's affair had never actually ended the way she told him it had. The questions driving this story are simple. Why did Rachel agree to reconcile if she had no intention of staying faithful? What was she really planning during those 11 months of therapy sessions and rebuilt trust? And what finally forced the truth into the open in a way neither of them could control? Stay with me, because the version of this story you think you are watching is not the one you are going to get. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Tom and Rachel Whitfield met in their late 20s at a small marketing firm outside Charlotte, North Carolina, where Tom worked in accounts and Rachel ran the design team. Co-workers who knew them then describe an easy, natural chemistry, the kind that made people assume they had been together for years before they actually started dating. Rachel was the one who noticed Tom first. According to a friend who worked 2 desks away, watching him stay late every night double-checking numbers other people had already signed off on, joking that he was the only accountant she had ever met who seemed to actually enjoy the job. Tom, for his part, has said he fell for her within the first real conversation they had, standing in the office kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, when she told him a joke so bad he laughed anyway just to be polite, and then found himself laughing again for real a moment later. They married 3 years later, in a backyard ceremony neither of them could really afford, surrounded by family who all said the same thing, that they had never seen 2 people fit together so easily. Tom's mother, in a toast that people still bring up at family gatherings, said she had never once seen her son look as certain about anything as he looked standing across from Rachel that afternoon. Rachel's father, a quiet man who rarely spoke at length about anything, pulled Tom aside before the ceremony and told him simply that his daughter had never let anyone in the way she had let Tom in, and that he hoped Tom understood what a rare thing that was. Within a decade, they had built a life that looked, from the outside, close to ideal. Tom left the marketing firm to start a small property management company, beginning with a single duplex he managed part-time while still working his day job. Rachel eventually joined him full-time, handling the client relationships and marketing, while Tom managed operations, the leases, the maintenance schedules, the endless small decisions that keep a business like that running, without anyone outside ever noticing the effort behind it. Within 5 years, they had grown from that single duplex to managing over 60 rental units across the county, a business built almost entirely on referrals and reputation, the kind of slow, steady growth that neither of them had expected, but both of them were proud of. They had 2 children, a boy named Caleb and a girl named Ellie, and a modest but comfortable home in a quiet suburb with a large oak tree in the backyard that Tom had built a swing set under the summer Ellie turned 4. Friends describe a couple who still seem to genuinely enjoy each other's company after 16 years, who took weekly date nights seriously even when it meant a quick dinner squeezed between soccer practice and bedtime, who rarely fought in front of anyone, and who, by every visible measure, seemed to have figured out something that a lot of long marriages never quite managed to hold on to. Underneath that surface, though, both of them later admitted the marriage had grown quietly distant in the 2 years leading up to the affair. Tom had thrown himself into growing the business, often working late into the evening, taking calls from tenants at hours most people would have let go to voicemail, driven by a need to prove the company could support the family on its own, without either of them ever having to worry the way their own parents had worried. Rachel had started to feel invisible in her own home, managing the children, the household, and a full workload at the company, while feeling, in her words, like a background character in her own life, present in every room but somehow no longer really seen in any of them. Neither of them raised these feelings directly with the other. Instead, the distance simply widened, one ordinary week at a time, the way it often does in marriages that look fine from the outside. Conversations at dinner shrank down to logistics. Who was picking up which child? Whether a tenant's plumbing issue had been resolved. Whether they had remembered to pay a particular bill. The small check-ins that used to happen naturally. How was your day? What are you thinking about? What do you need? Slowly stopped happening at all, not out of any conscious decision, but simply because there never seemed to be enough time, and because both of them assumed, wrongly, that the foundation underneath them was solid enough to withstand a little neglect. It was during this period that Rachel reconnected with a former colleague, a man named Derek Musgrove, through a professional networking event neither Tom nor anyone else thought twice about. Derek had worked briefly at the same marketing firm years earlier before moving into commercial real estate, and the two of them fell into an easy, familiar rapport almost immediately, the kind that comes from shared history and mutual understanding of an industry outsiders never quite get. What began as occasional friendly messages, catching up, sharing industry gossip, slowly became something else over the course of several months. Small compliments that lingered a little longer than they should have, conversations that ran later into the evening than either of them would have admitted to if asked directly. Rachel would later describe it as feeling seen and interesting again, in a way she had stopped feeling at home, not because Tom had done anything cruel or dismissive, but simply because the daily grind of the life they had built together had quietly stopped making room for the parts of her that had nothing to do with being a wife, a mother, or a business partner. Derek, she said, made her feel like the person she had been before all of those roles existed, and that feeling, more than anything physical, was what pulled her in deeper than she ever intended to go. By the time Tom discovered what was happening, the affair had been going on for close to 7 months. Tom found out the way many people do, by accident. He had borrowed Rachel's laptop to print a document for one of their properties, a lease renewal that needed to go out that afternoon, and stumbled across a message thread that made his stomach drop before he had even finished reading the first line. He described the moment later as feeling like the floor of his own house had opened beneath him without warning. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon he had been having replaced instantly by something he would remember in exact, physical detail for the rest of his life. The particular slant of afternoon light through the kitchen window, the sound of the refrigerator humming in the next room, the strange, distant calm that settled over him even as everything inside him was breaking apart. He did not confront her immediately. He sat with what he had read for nearly 6 hours, rereading messages, trying to understand not just what had happened, but how long it had been happening, without him noticing anything was wrong. Running back through the last 7 months in his mind looking for the moments he must have missed, the late nights he had assumed were work, the sudden interest in a networking group she had never mentioned before, the new perfume he had complimented without asking where it had come from. Each memory that resurfaced during those 6 hours landed like a small, separate injury, until by the time Rachel walked through the door that evening, Tom felt as though he had already lived through the worst of it in his own head, a dozen times over. When Tom finally confronted Rachel that evening, sitting her down at the same kitchen table where they had eaten dinner as a family the night before, she did not deny it. She was, by his account, immediately remorseful, tearful, and insistent that the affair had already ended 2 weeks earlier, that she had been planning to tell him herself, that she wanted nothing more than to save their marriage and their family. Tom describes the following weeks as the hardest of his life, oscillating between rage, grief, and a desperate hope that the version of his wife he had known for 16 years could somehow still be found underneath what she had done, that the woman across the table crying and apologizing was still, somewhere, the same person who had made that terrible joke in the office kitchen all those years earlier. Rachel pushed hard for reconciliation, and after weeks of agonizing, sleepless nights, conversations with his brother that ran until 2 in the morning, and long, silent drives with no destination just to be alone with his own thoughts, Tom agreed to try. He has said since that the decision was never really about whether he could forgive her. It was about whether he could live with himself if he did not at least try. Given everything they had built, given Caleb and Ellie, given 16 years that could not simply be erased by 7 months of mistakes, or so he believed at the time, they began couples therapy together, twice a week at first, then weekly as months passed, working with a therapist who specialized in infidelity recovery and who warned them both, in their very first session, that rebuilding trust after a betrayal like this one was not a straight line. That there would be setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the progress they thought they had made would feel like it had disappeared overnight. Rachel appeared, by every visible measure, deeply committed to rebuilding trust. She gave Tom access to her phone and email without being asked, unlocking both devices in front of him during one of their earliest sessions, as a gesture meant to prove she had nothing left to hide. She cut off contact with mutual friends who had known about the affair and had, in Tom's eyes, failed to warn him. She spoke openly in therapy sessions about the loneliness that had led her there, and took responsibility, in front of both the therapist and Tom, for the damage she had caused, using language that felt, at the time, like genuine accountability rather than performance. For nearly a year, things appeared to genuinely improve. Tom describes moments during that period, quiet dinners where conversation flowed the way it used to, a family vacation to the coast where for an entire week nothing about their family looked broken at all, ordinary Tuesday evenings spent doing homework with Caleb at the kitchen table, while Rachel made dinner and hummed along to the radio the way she used to before any of this happened, where he felt something like hope that they might actually come out the other side stronger than before. Friends and family who had watched the marriage nearly collapse were, by all appearances, witnessing a genuine recovery, the kind of story people like to hold up as proof that marriages can survive almost anything if both people are willing to do the work. What none of them knew, including Tom, was that Rachel had never fully ended things with Derek. The contact had simply moved further underground. Rachel had opened a second phone number under a different name, paid for with cash at a store 2 towns over where nobody would recognize her, kept hidden in a compartment of her car that Tom had no reason to search, tucked beneath the spare tire cover where it sat for months, without ever being discovered. Communication with Derek had continued throughout the entire reconciliation period, though at a reduced frequency during the weeks Tom had access to her primary phone, shifting instead to a rhythm built entirely around the times she knew she would not be observed. Brief windows during her commute, quiet stretches after Tom had gone to bed while she sat awake in the dark kitchen, telling herself this would be the last time. In therapy sessions, Rachel spoke convincingly about wanting her marriage to work, and those close to her later said they believed, at the time, that she meant every word of it. And in a strange way, by her own later account, she did mean it, at least in the moment she was saying it. She has since described living in what felt like 2 entirely separate realities during that year. One where she was genuinely trying to rebuild something real with Tom, and another, quieter one, that she kept telling herself she would close the door on eventually. Once she found the right moment, once she was ready, a moment that kept getting pushed further and further away, the longer both realities managed to coexist without colliding. The truth began to surface almost a year later, not because Tom went looking for it, but because of an unrelated event entirely outside his control. Derek's own wife, a woman named Patricia, who had no idea her husband's affair had ever restarted, discovered messages on his phone during an argument about something entirely separate, a disagreement over finances that had nothing to do with Rachel at all. In the process of confronting him that night, she learned that the affair with Rachel had never actually stopped, that it had continued in some form for the better part of 2 years, running quietly underneath both of their marriages the entire time. Devastated and furious, Patricia spent the following days gathering everything she could find. Screenshots, call logs, the address of an apartment Derek had apparently been renting under circumstances she did not yet fully understand. Before reaching out directly to Tom, a stranger to her until that phone call, to tell him what she had found. Tom describes receiving that call as somehow worse than the original discovery a year earlier, because this time, it meant the entire year of rebuilding. The therapy sessions, the family vacation, the quiet Tuesday evenings that had felt like proof they were healing, had been built on a continued lie the whole time. He remembers sitting in his truck in the parking lot of one of the properties he managed, listening to a woman he had never met describe messages between his wife and her husband dated only 3 weeks earlier, and feeling something inside him go completely still, past anger, past grief, into a kind of quiet he had never experienced before. Tom confronted Rachel again that evening, this time with messages forwarded directly from Patricia, dated only weeks earlier, laid out on the kitchen table where their entire reckoning had first begun a year before. Rachel, according to Tom, did not immediately confess. She initially claimed the messages were old, then claimed they were misunderstood, taken out of context, before finally, faced with timestamps she could not explain away, dates that lined up exactly with nights Tom remembered clearly as good nights, ordinary family nights, she broke down completely and admitted that the affair had never fully ended. She told Tom she had genuinely wanted their marriage to work, but had also been unable to fully let go of what she had with Derek, and had told herself, somehow, that she could manage both without either relationship being harmed, a belief she now recognized as both selfish and, in hindsight, almost impossible to justify to herself, let alone to him. What followed was not the explosive confrontation many might expect. Tom describes a quiet, exhausted numbness settling over him instead, a feeling he compares to running a marathon only to discover, at what he believed was the finish line, that the course had secretly doubled in length without telling him. He moved out within the week, staying with his brother, while he began the process of separating both his marriage and his business partner, MAMA, from Rachel simultaneously. Since the two had never been legally distinct, the company built and structured around both of their names from the very first duplex they had purchased together over a decade earlier. The unwinding took months, complicated by shared property, shared clients who had no idea their property managers were quietly ending a marriage behind the scenes, and 2 children who did not yet understand why their parents were suddenly living in different houses, why family dinners had stopped, why the swing set under the oak tree sat unused most weekends, while Caleb and Ellie split their time between 2 addresses instead of 1. Tom has said the hardest conversations of the entire ordeal were not with Rachel or with lawyers, but with his own children, trying to explain something in age-appropriate terms that he himself was still struggling to fully understand. News of what had really happened during that year of reconciliation spread quickly through the small circle of friends and extended family who had watched Tom and Rachel rebuild what everyone assumed was a genuine second chance. Reactions split in ways that surprised almost everyone involved. Some friends, particularly those who had privately questioned how quickly the marriage seemed to heal after the first discovery, said they were not entirely shocked, admitting they had noticed small things during that year that had felt slightly off without ever being able to name exactly why. Others, including members of Tom's own extended family who had grown close to Rachel over 16 years, struggled to reconcile the woman they had watched cry in therapy sessions and cook Sunday dinners with the picture that was now emerging from the divorce filings. Tom's mother, the same woman who had toasted the couple's certainty on their wedding day, has said the hardest part for her was not anger at Rachel, though there was plenty of that, but grief over losing a version of her daughter-in-law she had genuinely come to love, a woman who had sat beside her at hospital bedsides, who had remembered every birthday without fail, who had, in every way that mattered on the surface, been family. She has said that betrayal on this scale does not just break the person it happens to, it ripples outward into every relationship that had been built around the marriage, leaving people who had nothing to do with the affair still sorting through their own sense of what had been real and what had not. During the divorce proceedings, more details surfaced that reframed the entire year of apparent reconciliation in a way nobody had anticipated. Financial records, pulled during discovery by Tom's attorney, showed Rachel had been quietly diverting portions of client payments into a separate account during the same period she had presented herself as fully committed to rebuilding the marriage. Small amounts at first, skimmed carefully enough that they had not shown up in the routine bookkeeping Tom handled. Money that was later traced, in part, to expenses connected to maintaining her relationship with Derek, including a rented apartment neither Tom nor anyone else had known existed, and a series of cash withdrawals that lined up with the same weeks the second hidden phone had been most active. The revelation of the diverted funds shifted the divorce from an emotional separation into a legal dispute over the business itself. Tom's attorney argued that Rachel's actions during the reconciliation period constituted a breach of the fiduciary responsibilities she held as a business partner, separate entirely from the personal betrayal of the affair, a distinction that mattered a great deal in how the case would ultimately be decided. The case, unusually for a divorce proceeding, became less about the infidelity itself, which family courts are generally reluctant to weigh heavily in property division, and more about whether a spouse who had already broken trust once could be held legally accountable for exploiting that same rebuilding period for direct financial gain. Depositions in the case revealed a pattern that surprised even Tom's attorney, a paper trail stretching back nearly the entire length of the reconciliation period, showing Rachel had continued making decisions, small ones individually but substantial when added together, that prioritized maintaining her relationship with Derek over the financial health of the business she and Tom had spent over a decade building. Client invoices had occasionally been delayed or handled inconsistently during weeks she was later shown to have been traveling to see Derek under the guise of visiting an out-of-town relative, a story Tom had believed without question at the time. One particular exchange during depositions has stayed with Tom more than almost any other moment in the entire process. Rachel's own attorney, attempting to soften the picture being painted by the financial records, asked her directly whether she had loved her husband during the year they spent in therapy together. Rachel, according to the court transcript, paused for what witnesses in the room described as an uncomfortably long moment before answering that she believed she had, in her own way, while also acknowledging she understood how impossible that must sound to anyone hearing it from the outside. Tom has said hearing that answer read back to him, calm and measured in a courtroom months after the fact, was in some ways harder to sit with than the original discovery had been, because it forced him to accept that love and betrayal had apparently been able to exist inside her at exactly the same time, occupying the same year, the same conversations, sometimes the same afternoon. The forensic accountant, brought in by Tom's legal team, spent nearly 3 weeks reconstructing the business's financial history, cross-referencing bank statements, client contracts, and mileage logs from the company vehicles against the timeline Patricia had provided. The picture that emerged was more extensive than anyone initially expected, showing a pattern of small, carefully spaced withdrawals designed to stay below the threshold that would normally trigger a closer look during routine bookkeeping, the kind of quiet, incremental diversion that only becomes visible when someone finally has a reason to go looking for it. Tom's attorney later noted that had Patricia never made that phone call, there was a real possibility the financial pattern would have continued indefinitely, hidden inside a business built on the very trust it was quietly undermining. The court ultimately awarded Tom full ownership of the property management company, along with a portion of the diverted funds that could be traced and recovered, while granting Rachel a smaller settlement, reflecting her original contributions to the business over the years before the affair began. For a woman who had once run the client-facing side of a thriving company, built over more than a decade, the outcome represented a significant professional and financial setback, one that followed her into an industry where her reputation had already been damaged by how the story became known within their shared professional circles. A tight-knit local business community where very little stays private for long. Derek's marriage did not survive the revelation either. Patricia filed for divorce shortly after her discovery, unwilling, as she told mutual acquaintances at the time, to spend one more day wondering what else she had not been told. By most accounts, the relationship between Rachel and Derek did not continue much longer beyond that point either, having been built. Many who knew them observed less on genuine connection than on the excitement of something forbidden, something that lost much of its appeal once it was no longer hidden, once it no longer required the elaborate secrecy that had, in its own strange way, been part of what made it feel meaningful to both of them. Rachel, according to people close to the situation, found herself in the following year with neither her marriage, her business, nor the relationship she had risked everything to maintain, a period she has since described as the loneliest of her life, stripped of the very things she had spent 2 years quietly protecting at the expense of everything else around her. She has since moved to a different city, started over in a smaller design role, unrelated to real estate, and, according to those still in occasional contact with her, has spoken about the experience with a level of honesty about her own choices that she was never able to access during the years it was actually happening. Tom, for his part, has said in the time since that the hardest part was never the initial affair. People make mistakes, he has said, and mistakes can sometimes be forgiven and rebuilt from, given enough time, enough honesty, enough genuine effort, on both sides. What he has struggled to reconcile is the year that followed. The version of Rachel who sat across from him in therapy spoke of wanting their family whole again, cried real tears he still believes were genuine in the moment, and meant it enough to make him believe her, while simultaneously maintaining the very relationship that had broken them in the first place. He has said he no longer trusts his own ability to know when someone is telling him the truth, a doubt that has followed him well beyond the marriage itself, into new relationships, into ordinary conversations with people who have given him no reason to doubt them at all. He has custody of Caleb and Ellie the majority of the time now, has kept the business running under the same name it always had, and has said, in the rare interviews he has given about the experience, that he does not regret trying to forgive Rachel the first time. What he regrets, if anything, is not asking harder questions during the year that followed, not trusting the quiet unease he sometimes felt, and dismissed as his own lingering trauma, rather than a signal worth investigating. He has said that unease, in hindsight, was trying to tell him something the entire time, and that learning to listen to it, rather than talk himself out of it, has become one of the few lasting lessons he has taken from the whole experience. Caleb, now a teenager, has said little publicly about what happened, though Tom has described a shift in his son over the past year, a certain guardedness around trust that Tom recognizes because he sees it in himself as well, and that he works hard, in small daily ways, to make sure does not calcify into something permanent. Ellie, younger and less aware of the full details, still asks occasionally why her parents live in different houses, questions Tom answers as honestly as he can, without placing the full weight of what happened onto a child too young to carry it. He has said that watching his children absorb the fallout of a decision that was never theirs to make has been, in some ways, harder than absorbing it himself. Tom has also spoken, cautiously, about beginning to date again in the past year, describing it as a strange, uneven process, moments of genuine connection, followed by sudden waves of doubt that seem to arrive without warning. A lingering instinct to search for the second phone, the hidden account, the version of events beneath the version being told to him. He has said he does not know yet whether that instinct will ever fully quiet down, or whether it has simply become a permanent part of how he moves through relationships now, a kind of scar tissue that never quite stops, reminding him it is there. Was justice really served in a case where the deepest wound was never the affair itself, but the year of genuine seeming effort that turned out to be only partially real? Would you have noticed the signs Tom missed? The second phone, the quiet inconsistencies, the year that felt almost too smooth given what they had been through, the small financial irregularities that no one thought to question because they trusted the person behind them. That is for you to decide. What do you think was really happening in Rachel's mind during that year of reconciliation? Do you think she genuinely believed she could keep both her marriage and the affair intact indefinitely? Or did some part of her always know it would eventually collapse, and simply chose not to look at that knowledge directly for as long as she possibly could? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story kept you on edge, wait until you hear what happened when a husband discovered his wife's entire second identity, complete with a second family, 3 states away. Subscribe for more real-life stories of trust, betrayal, and the people left to pick up the pieces.